Chuck Conrad with a kickoff. Roy has a strong leg, end over end. Sanders takes it 1 yard deep to the end zone. Up the middle of 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. He's at the 40. He's at 45, 50, 45, 40, 35, 30, 45, 20, 50, 10, 5. Touchdown, Cowboys. Just like last year, a great story.
Welcome to the Heisman Trophy Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Houston. We are spending the offseason here at the podcast exploring the ways that elite athletes like Heisman Trophy winners, like Olympic gold medalists, how they differ from regular athletes, how they differ from regular folks like us. So unlike previous episodes, we're not going to be talking to any famous athletes or any famous coaches. We are going to talk to a neuroscientist, however, Dr. Stephanie Alessi LaRosa. She's the head of the sports neurology department at Hartford Healthcare. Sticking with the neurology theme, we also talked to Zach Schomburn, who is the author of The Performance Cortex. Both of these guests touch upon the brain development in young athletes, which is why I thought it was appropriate to bring onto the show a young athlete who is developing at this very moment. And you'll meet him a little bit later, but he is Davis Wilson, class of 2027, one of the top high school baseball prospects in the country, committed to the Vanderbilt Commodores, already generating some interest from Major League Baseball. And we'll close things out with Max Brown, former five-star quarterback out of the state of Washington, coming back for his third time to the Heisman Trophy podcast. He's going to talk a little bit about his experience as a young quarterback, and also he has an interesting take on the possible demise of the Mamba mentality.
This is Archie Griffin, 1974, 1975's Heisman Trophy winner, and you're listening to the official Heisman podcast.
We now continue our exploration of athletic greatness and its origins with Dr. Stephanie Alessi LaRosa. She's a neuroscientist who leads one of the few sports neurology programs in the country at Hartford Healthcare's Ayer Neuroscience Institute. Stephanie, welcome to the Heisman Trophy podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great for you to be here. One of the reasons I invited you on the show is I really wanted to try to understand from as many angles as possible what differentiates an athlete that performs at the very highest of levels on the most intense of stages from those athletes who may be very talented, yes, but maybe they just never quite figured out how to put it all together. So first off, let's get some basic stuff out of the way. What exactly is neuroscientist, and how does a neuroscientist typically keep busy?
Well, I mean, that's a big world, I would say. So neuroscience is certainly the study of the nervous system, which includes the brain, spinal cord, peripheral nerves, and then certainly at the cellular and molecular level and all of the things in between. And I'm a sports neurologist, so that obviously involves neuroscience. And I mean, our worlds can all look different ways. Some of them are more research, some are more clinical. You know, my particular role as a sports neurologist is treating patients. I'm a physician and a board certified neurologist, and I did a fellowship training in sports neurology. And so basically I'm on the sidelines at football games. I'm part of the sports medicine team that way. And then I'm also a ringside physician. So I work with boxers and mixed martial arts people as well, and certainly all professionals in between as well. So
very cool.
There's a whole world, of what people could be doing in our space, but it's an exciting space, as you can imagine.
For sure. What led you to specialize in this area of neuroscience?
Great question. So my father is a neurologist, but I actually fought it. I was going to be a physical therapist, and then I said, I really want to be an expert in something, and I want that instant credibility that an MD gives me. And so I decided to then go to medical school. And I was sort of open to all specialties, but I was always drawn to the neurologic related kind of issue on any rotation I was in. And so I couldn't fight it anymore, and then went with what was calling me, which was neurology.
Yeah. You must have come across, dozens, if not hundreds, or even thousands of athletes over your career. From what you've been able to observe, how do athlete brains differ from those of non-athletes, or if at all? Is there actually a difference that we can differentiate between those types?
I mean, honestly, it's something that's definitely being researched. I think that that's something, there's a lot we don't know about. That nature versus nurture kind of an issue, and sort of, performance is certainly a very hot topic now, in terms of developing brains and developing athletes, and what are those traits, that we really look for that are common across high level athletes or elite athletes, and really trying to capture what causes that to happen, or what makes that come. And some of it's, I think there's a long list of things that could be. It really is coaching, positive experiences in childhood, I think is a really important thing. There's this idea of adverse childhood events, and those are all things that can really be deleterious to certainly athletes, but development of the brain, and performance goes along with that. So it's an interesting field, because there's not one thing that I would say is the secret sauce. It is the family life, the stability, how what environments kids are in that promote those positive traits.
So it's just more of a general thing versus any specific thing you might do.
I mean, we know what doesn't work, or things that would be, harmful to that or work against somebody. And that's, again, like I was saying, the adverse childhood events is the ACEs score. And these are things that, like, if a kid under 18 years old is exposed to somebody who, went to prison, or who witnessed physical abuse or had sexual abuse, or certain things like that, had divorced parents even, it could even be as mild as that. But that those are things that, do change brain development. They do affect that. They do affect actually causing, chronic health issues down the road, like things like diabetes and high blood pressure. I mean, there's even relationships between that from how patients and kids are brought up. And so I think in a general sense, that's a good starting place. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be a high performing athlete and have some adverse childhood events. I think we all know some athletes, there's been plenty of stories of them, people coming out of, absolutely, and rising above some of that, even in spite of some of those conditions. And that to me is actually very interesting. And again, we don't know what that is or what makes that happen. And I don't even think that those particular people or athletes know that. But sometimes having that sports outlet is huge. The risks and benefits of playing sports, I mean, especially at the amateur level, I always tell patients, the benefits outweigh the risks. Even with what we know of concussions and all the other, things that can happen injury wise, there's still tons of benefits of playing sports, and that being even protective. Physical activity is protective against some of these issues. So it's a very complex thing, but it's very interesting, and there's just a lot that can go into it.
Yeah. From a neurological standpoint, are there any benefits? I know there's social benefits, and there's personal, there's mental benefits and emotional benefits, but from a neurological standpoint, is there anything that the brain benefits from athletes playing sports?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like plasticity, there's associations with that, recovery, resilience, having a brain fitness, okay, is another area that's really becoming more and more studied and better understood. But it's the brain fitness in terms of, hydration and sleep and exercise and all of those things that are strengthening to the brain and protective against some of, like I was saying, some even mood disorders or other issues that can occur. But I would say it's not just like, one lobe or something, right? It's hard to name the structures. There's so many involved in these types of traits and features we're talking about. I mean, the frontal lobes is like for planning, for executive functioning, multitasking. There's executive functioning that has to be at a point where, we talk about athletes sort of IQ within their sport and having that sort of, elite level of those things. I mean, and is that frontal lobe? Is there hippocampus involved? I mean, that's like a spatial navigation kind of thing. There's so many parts of the brain that do go into this, and certainly sports specific will have different areas involved, if that makes sense too. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Is this kind of a true thing about routine is bad for neural pathways, at least as far as like creating new neural pathways? It's the brain. It almost goes on autopilot when you have routine. And if that's the case, right. I'm thinking, like you were talking about the health of the brain. sports being good for the health of the brain. And I was thinking that maybe is one of the reasons it's good, the unpredictability of sports, right? And some
Yeah.
sports are more unpredictable than others. Do athletes who play sports that are in a sense more repetitive, more like consistently like repetitive muscle memory, versus things where they're going out there and you never know what's going to come at them? Does one athlete maybe have a more healthier brain as a result of that than the other one?
That's a great question, because we do talk about brain routines and that routines are very good in general for all people, right? Athletes aside, and athletes do love a regimen and they love a training routine and things like that. But I would say, in the general population, the brain likes to know when it's getting its meals, when it's getting its hydration, when it's getting its sleep. These are predictable things that it likes. Now, in terms of training and muscle memory and doing, rote kind of things that they have to do every day for certain training, I think that that's necessary. Okay, sure, for any sport to have those things. But to your point, learning a new skill is a protective thing against dementia, let's say. There is a lot of research that's saying when you learn a language or you learn a new skill or you can learn something different or something, again, unpredictable about their day or about their whatever, their sport, could be also building connections and giving the brain that fitness, like we're saying. So I think it's a combination. I think musculoskeletally, just kind of touching on that, there is a lot of things, especially in children now, that we're worried about sports specialization. And that's where a kid is now playing one sport year round because there's travel team after travel team after travel team or whatever it is. And they're not getting other skills and other muscle groups involved from playing multiple sports in different seasons like it used to be. Yeah. And that's a concern. That is actually a concern amongst sports medicine doctors now that things are going that way. And that might predispose them to earlier surgeries or earlier injuries than they would have had in life otherwise. So in a general sense, I think both could be true, that both situations of having a routine and also having some unpredictability is good. Like in boxing, I always use that as an example. I actually work also with professional bull riders. And so that's always unpredictable because you're on an animal. Okay. And then in the ring, it's always unpredictable which way somebody's going with this or that, especially mixed martial arts and combat sports. So those are the examples that come to my mind. But really it's interesting because I think it's a good balance of both. But that sports specialization, I think at the young age has become an issue.
Yeah, bull riding, that's pretty unpredictable as much as you can get, I think. The best athletes are just amazing at handling pressure. We've talked a lot on the show, where the Heisman Trophy podcast, Fernando Mendoza, these crazy moments that he has been in during his Heisman season. And this, it's almost like he was born to be in those moments. What part of the brain is responsible for regulating this and dealing with it?
I think there's a balance that has to happen in terms of, we talk about this curve that happens with stress, so like if somebody's got, high performing people, right, in general, they have this curve of like, stress and performance. And so when people get to a peak level of stress, that gives them their peak performance. But there is a world where too much stress or too much, issues on that side makes the performance go down. And so I think it takes a lot of balancing. The mental is huge in this piece. And I think the psychology of sports is that's where you get differences. And I don't know as much about his case in particular, but I would say, there has to be some level of stress management that has to be healthy, and being obviously trained up and prepared for some of these things, but having, again, that sort of sports IQ or that IQ about the ability to integrate all of the scenarios and make a decision. It's complex. I would say it uses all areas because you're going to use the motor area, the sensory area, the auditory, but the planning of the frontal lobes, it's going to require all of these things. And certainly heart rate and all the other, those are brainstem things even. So that's really even deep seated areas. So I think it requires a ton, and people don't give I think sports and athletes enough credit in terms of how neurologically complicated they are. Really, even in baseball, to like hit a baseball is like, that's pretty difficult, and at the speed that they're coming, I mean, it really does take a lot. So just as an example of different sports, but I mean, in Heisman's, trophy cases, I would say that is something that is a lot of each of these pieces.
Yeah. Are people of this caliber, are they born with this ability, or can it be developed?
That's the question, right? I think some people, maybe there's a gene for it, because we've seen many generational high level athletes, Olympians that are just like their grandparent and their parent and now them and their uncle, or maybe there's a gene component to some of this. And again, is that more the musculoskeletal, sort of like the build, the anatomy of the person in some ways, right? That's certainly part of it. But again, that training lifestyle, I think that's another piece that is, and having maybe generational components to it. You're sort of brought up in that environment, right? And so, like I'm saying, even in childhood, there's some of this. But certainly if it's, somebody without coming from those beginnings, and sort of in an adverse situation and finding their way forward, is impressive beyond, really what anybody would expect. And so those stories, I think, are always pretty resonating with the general population, certainly as a sports neurologist, because we know what that brain was up against, and we know, how much harder that was psychologically, but resource wise, right? Maybe they didn't have the best coach. Maybe they didn't have the best, resources and social situation. So, I mean, I think that would be amazing. If we knew what that was, everybody would be an Olympian, or everybody would win the Heisman,
Right.
So it's kind of one of those things that we're all staying tuned for. But the variability, the heterogeneity is what makes sports, I think, special, and having your favorite player and having players that are interesting in their own way, in their own position. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun that way.
Sure. And forgive me if this is an ignorant question scientifically, but is this something that could be like an epigenetic trait at some point, where like the imprint of, some point, like you talked about grandparents, somebody was in the World Series, and the imprint of this high pressure moment creates this epigenetic thing? Is that completely out of bounds, or is that something that is maybe a possibility?
I mean, I think it's on the table. I don't know. There's so many things that go into that too, but it's hard to say on what scale, right? We get these anecdotal kind of families that we see things like this with, but maybe not on like a large scale. But I think, there is something to it. I don't know to what scale we'll see it develop, but I mean, it's impressive when it's just, person after person after person in the same family and stuff. It's cool.
For sure. Does the ability to handle that pressure in a sport, does it theoretically carry over into other areas of life? And if not, why not?
Great question. I treat a lot of high school students and college athletes. And so that student athlete thing, right, I think prepares folks to get to that other level too, because they have to then perform highly academically and athletically. And so I see that push-pull almost, that, when somebody comes to me with an injury, okay, and that's always going to throw an athlete off of their normal routine because they're not necessarily in their sport, and they still feel the pressure of these other things, academics and whatever. So I think that there's a lot to be said for, that the traits that make somebody a good athlete can also be carried into how they approach all tasks or all things that are asked of them, in some ways. Now, that's not everybody. Certainly there's some that are, more athletically inclined than the academics, but, and vice versa. And I think that there's, still some overlap there. But I think the people who have, we can even recognize some of those athletes that have both at a high level. And I think that's always pretty impressive, because again, from a stress standpoint and just from, a neuroscience standpoint, that's a big deal. It's hard to be cognitively and physically elite.
You're right. Yeah. You mentioned earlier about how on balance, the aggregate benefits of playing sports still outweighs, potential concussions. You've done a lot of work with concussions. And I'm curious, does head trauma early in one's athletic career, does that affect how the brain ultimately develops from from the perspective of being able to perform at a high level athletically?
There is a lot of, again, research being done on that. I don't have any causation or ways of saying for sure this and that. But I think certainly in a general sense, the brain does not like being struck, right? It doesn't like being injured. So as much as at a youth level, certainly as the brain is developing, even into people's early 20s, I think people don't think that the brain is still developing, but the frontal lobes still don't fully myelinate until early 20s in terms of age. So, but even at those much younger ages, like youth level sports, I'm thinking, and things like that, having injuries, concussion or brain injuries, mild traumatic brain injuries, it's unknown how harmful it is, because we can really only track the symptoms, and we can only track what's sort of in front of us or presenting to us as clinicians. So it's hard to say. I think, if it wasn't from sports, it might be from the playground. It might be from a car accident. It might be from what things happen. Okay. And I don't like when patients are worried about their next hit. That's not something you can be worried about. There's no control over a lot of that. But I do think that, as much as we can prevent or reduce exposures to unnecessary hits, we need to be doing that. So not having contact practices at these young ages, promoting flag football at these young ages, skills building, those types of things are really the interventions from a public health standpoint that makes the most sense to me.
Okay. We often talk about how people who are elite athletes are wired a certain way. Is that a real thing, or is that just society trying to explain something with their own lingo?
Yeah, I think there is some of that. Like in terms of patients, there's a lot of patients that I have, and certainly athletes and high level athletes, they want to lie to me. Okay. And I accept that as part of my job, that I may not get the truth out of my patient. And so, because they want to get back to play, they want to, get back to whatever their normal life was and not be seeing a neurologist anymore. Right. So, I think in terms of like what they're wired, I understand that, because I can tell in the room what kind of patient or what kind of athlete I have in front of me. This is somebody who's been a self-starter. They've gotten this and that all lined up for themselves, and they have these future goals and things like that. And I try to get an understanding of what that is, so that I know how I can best support them. But some people are wired to just go, whether they're injured or not. They want to keep going. They will push through. They will fight through. And the brain does not love that. And it won't get better on their timeline. It will get better on its own timeline. And every brain is different. And every concussion in this case, right? Every concussion in the same person, let's say they've had multiple concussions, each concussion is different. So the saying is, if you've seen one concussion, you've only seen one concussion.
I see. Okay. There are a lot of great athletes out there. Not a lot of elite athletes, but there's a lot of great athletes out there. And it seems like, depending on the athlete, there's a certain point in their development where there's like some kind of trigger where they realize that if they focus, work hard, then they can become elite and they can do this for their career. How do brains develop that trigger? I mean, you have the dopamine hit of like winning championships and winning games, and that must feel great, but it has to be more than that, right? There has to be something that's happening beneath the surface that is pushing them to be like these, like the Michael Jordans, and maybe these are just complete outliers, the tiny percentage of people, but there are in every sport, there's one, a few of these athletes who are just above and beyond what everybody else is, even the ones that are equal or better even athletically, but they're able to overcome to surpass them because of these maybe figuring this out before the other people did, right?
Right. Honestly, I think the biggest the best next area in terms of like being that full package does come from the sports psychology, because that mental toughness, that ability to be resilient in a situation where it's not going to take them down, or they have that ability to push through and stuff. I think that is, really the next place that takes athletes to that next level. I think that that's really a huge part of it, because everyone can train. Everyone can train. Everyone can have the best, some people, right? If you get the best coach, you get all these other things that are top, 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 top. You come from a great program, you've got all the resources, whatever. So, but the difference, I think, comes from a lot of that sports psychology. And certainly there's, genetics and maybe some other things. And again, the childhood adverse events, stuff like that, I think are all part of it, part of the story. But yeah, I think the sports psychology part doesn't really get enough mention, because I think that's huge. If they can visualize where they want to be, and they can, have that mental toughness and sort of that resiliency about what they're doing and how to push through, and, when it's appropriate, all of those things. When they have that, I think that's what really gets them there.
Interesting. If you could do like a fantastic voyage and go inside and observe a section of the brain of, say, LeBron James during the closing seconds of an important game,
Yes.
where would you go? Like, would you think you would see at that place?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think in terms of like, we think of the cerebrum, which is that topmost part of the brain, and its connections from hemisphere to hemisphere, right, one side to the other, and then into the midbrain, and then the brain stem, and all of that. I mean, I think there's a little of each area that would be exciting. The frontal lobes, I think, are the most exciting, because that's where the planning is happening. That's the executive decision making that goes on, and then directs motor, and even communicating back and forth with heart rate control and things like that. I think that all of that starts really to generate from the frontal lobes, because there's that cognitive part of what their decisions are being made and things like that. So I would go there.
Okay. Your specialty, sports neurology, is still fairly young. What's the future hold for this area, and what kind of interesting research is going on that you hope down the road we're gonna learn some real things about what's going on inside the brain?
Great question. I mean, I think the landscape is pretty wide in terms of what's being studied out there. I think as a sports neurologist, my job is always exciting. It takes me to different places. I meet athletes doing all kinds of things that I'm learning about all the time, different sports, extreme sports, and I hear more and more about different exciting things people are doing and choosing to do. But I think in terms of research, CTE is such a big topic, right? And everyone's worried about it. I think clinically, where we get from the bedside to like the post-mortem, brain cutting and things that happen at that level, there is so much we don't know. We have associations from head injury. We don't have causation. And that is what I think gets missed in the media, is that that's not the same thing. Having an association and having a causation of head injuries causing these things, we don't have that information. And I think that that's a key point in the research, that, these more longitudinal, long-term studies that are coming out, that's going to take time. That's going to take funds and money. And that's going to take, participants on both sides, injured and not injured, to be comparing to. And so the study designs and all of this, very important work, and it has to be had, because we just don't have that piece. And I think that's every parent's what they want. They want to know, what does this mean now for my kid, 30, 40, 50, 60 years from now? And we don't have those answers. But I think in terms of, there's a lot of hope in terms of what we can treat. So when someone has signs or symptoms of degenerative things down the road from sports, we have treatments for those things, and they need to meet with a sports neurologist to find those.
Dr. Stephanie Alessi LaRosa, thanks for coming on the Heisman Trophy podcast. Wow, what an interesting discussion. Really appreciate you taking the time, and wish you the best of luck in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
Hey guys, this is Barry Sanders, the 1988 Heisman Trophy winner, and you are listening to the official Heisman Trophy podcast.
Did you know that the Heisman Trophy Trust has donated more than $20 million to a huge variety of charity-based groups via its Heisman Trophy Fund for Youth Development? That's right, the fund has helped countless charitable organizations that uses sports to engage underprivileged young people in educational activities. If you are part of an organization or know of one that would like to apply for funding, visit Heisman.com and click on the charities link at the top of the site.
Hello, Heisman.
This offseason, the Heisman Trophy podcast is exploring what separates Heisman winners and other elite performers from regular athletes. We want to find out how that talent is first discovered, how those key developmental attributes are first brought together with that unique athleticism that these guys have, why these players are specifically wired the way they are, and so on. This week's episode, we are focusing on the origins of elite athleticism as it pertains to brain development and neural elasticity, especially in young athletes. And to guide us a bit on that topic, we have Zach Schombrun, the deputy editor for business and tech at The Week. More important, he wrote a whole book on this very topic back in 2019 called The Performance Cortex: How Neuroscience is Redefining Athletic Genius. He talked to a bunch of neuroscientists and people who are on the cutting edge of athletic development, so he can, tell us some things about that maybe we can't get access to. So, Zach, welcome to the Heisman Trophy podcast.
Thank you very much, Chris. Happy to be here.
So it's been 6 years since your book came out, and I imagine this is like a lifetime given how fast things move in this kind of research. First, tell me what moved you to write on this subject, and if you were updating things now, what would you focus on that you didn't do before?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. First, why I wrote this book, I used to be a sports writer. I was a sports writer for eight years as a freelancer for the New York Times and ESPN, the magazine, and a variety of other outlets. And, I like most people, I got into sports. I loved sports. And I loved writing about sports because I was enamored with the great athleticism and the skill of elite athletes. And like most of us, I considered great athletes to be, impressive because of how fast they moved and how high they jumped and how strong they were. I mean, I would, watch someone like Michael Jordan and like we all did and see how high he could jump and how he could move his body and became impressed and enamored with that. And, as I thought more about what it takes to be skilled and what is required of great athletes, the more I sort of questioned how big a role that muscular strength and speed actually plays. Through just talking to visiting science labs and talking to neuroscientists, it became clearer and clearer to me that actually the root of great athletes and what is actually the bigger contributor to skill and talent as we know it is not, it's not the muscles, it's not the strength, it's really their ability to process information really, really quickly. It's their decision making. It's their memory for schemes and their recognition of things that are unfolding in front of them and how it relates to what they have memorized in their playbooks or from their from what their coaches have told them. It's their, as you mentioned, their ability to handle pressure in pressure situations. And ultimately, it's the signals, it's the multitude of signals that are being sent from the brain to those muscles to coordinate a large number of muscles and joints and ligaments and branches of limbs, all in coordination and syncopation. Those are the things that are defining of great athletes more than just the size and the strength, the measurables that we that we hold the NFL scouting combine to measure. It's the other stuff that's going on underneath the hood that is a bigger recognition that should be recognized, I should say. Yeah. So that's really what I wrote the book about, and was the driving impetus was just sort of trying to counter a little bit of that prevailing belief around why we love sports and why we love athletes so much. As far as where things would go today, if I was rewriting it, honestly, Chris, not a whole lot has changed. The hard thing about trying to assess athletes from a neuroscience, from a brain standpoint, is the imaging equipment just is not. It's not there. It wasn't there when I started writing, and there are ways to sort of approximate things and try to understand things a little bit better. But it's still it's not perfect, and there's still a long way to go. from the technology and the science standpoint. So it probably would not, and and athletes as well are not, they're not necessarily jumping into neuroscience labs and into MRIs to get scanned
Mm.
any more readily than they were 6 years ago. My book followed a company that was using an EEG scanner with professional baseball players, and they're still working today.
Mm.
So things haven't changed too much, which is kind of interesting in its own
Hmm.
in its own right.
Yeah. What kind of research then, since we're not looking inside the brain as much, there's a lot of research perhaps on what is influencing the brain from the outside. Has there been any research, or have you seen any information as far as from different neuroscientists, as far as like, do any of these elite athletes have things in common that they go through, whether it's things at the nurture level, nature, nurture, all that kind of thing. I mean, these are athletes who their prefrontal cortex hasn't developed yet, and yet they're making these decisions like you talk about in split second situations, and be great executive decision makers like Fernando Mendoza. What about the external factors that relate to brain development?
I mean, from as I mentioned, the neuroscience isn't perfect where it is as far as being able to um to image athletes while they're on the field doing what they do. That's not possible. But from the
Mm,
from the access that they are able to get in neuroscience laboratories and in MRI machines, sort of approximating what athletes are doing via screens, and simulations. All that,
mm,
what they have found through that work is that athletes are absolutely wired differently than you or me. There's there's things that, like, the famous example of this, and he's not a football player, but there's a rock climber, Alex Honnold, who maybe you know the name because he was the free solo climber, and he recently did that Netflix special where he climbed that
yeah,
tower in I think it was, what was it, Kuala Lumpur.
I can't watch
And
those things. It's
so a
too
few
scary for me.
well, exactly, right.
Yeah.
So a few years ago, he it took part in a study and went to a lab, neuroscience lab, and had his brain scanned in an MRI. And what they found was that his amygdala was not functioning as well or as normal, or as the way other normal people would. Now, the amygdala is the brain region that's responsible for fear, for the production of the emotion of fear, right?
Mm,
And so that was made sense. This
yeah.
guy's fearless, and why is he fearless? It's because he doesn't have an amygdala the way that you or I would.
Hmm.
Now, what's interesting is Alex has talked about this, and he is not sure whether or not that's because he was born with an amygdala that, wasn't the size or wasn't responsive as normal people were, and that is what led him to become a rock climber. That's certainly possible. Or, it's just something that he trained over time to
Hmm.
overcome his fear, and therefore, the rest of the brain was responding, and with the brain
Hmm.
neuroplasticity, it's sort of overwhelmed that amygdala response. um, you know, that is, and we'll never know. We didn't scan him when he was born. Um, so we don't know what his amygdala looked like then. And we certainly know that neuroplasticity is a thing. It does happen. The more you use your brain, it's like a muscle, use it or lose it. And there are certain regions that if they are used more or less, they will change structurally in response. So,
Hmm.
are there running backs out there that who are running full speed into a line of 350-pound men who may not have a functioning amygdala like you or I, and that is what
Scary.
gives them the fearlessness to perform. It's certainly possible. We don't know, and we don't really know, again, whether or not it's something that is born through nature or is nurtured. These are tricky questions. My belief, and we can unpack this a little bit if you want, but I
Mm,
I I generally think that it's probably more on the nurture side.
hmm. Yeah. Based on that, based on what you found, what kinds of childhood experiences do you think would best wire the brain for elite performance?
Yeah, I mean, well, listen, I mean, it's hard to it's hard to say, exactly what, what's the proper way to nurture,
Mm-hmm.
a budding athlete. I mean, I think what is what's most evident is that exposure um, simulations, to practice simulations of what they are going to experience is what trains the brain to be able to better handle what
Mm-hmm.
it's going to encounter when they are actually in that scenario, right?
Mm-hmm.
um it's playing a video game is not playing Madden as a video game is not going to get you to become the next Tom Brady, even though it's close. I mean, you're still playing. It's different than actually being on the field, and in handling the rigors of what a football environment is going to
Mm-hmm.
be, and playing a different game, a completely different game like Tetris is going to be is absolutely not going to prepare your brain for what it's going to
Mm-hmm.
encounter in a basketball or baseball game.
Yeah.
And so the more that a you know I get a young athlete can be exposed to practice. I mean, it gets back to this. What's the axiom? Practice makes perfect. It's not necessarily about making perfect, but it's preparing the brain for what it's going to encounter.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what gives your decision making. That's what boosts your decision making. It makes your processing speed better. It enhances your recognition and memory for scenes, for where your teammates are supposed to be, that you're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to pass, that you're going to pass the ball to. All those things that I mentioned earlier are the bigger contributors to athletic success. The only I should say the best way to nurture those aspects is through experience, is through
Mm-hmm.
practice.
Yeah. Do you think there's a golden window in development where the brain is especially responsive to training sport specific skills?
Um, I'm not sure. I mean, certainly there's evidence that neuroplasticity and brain development is at its most flexible and its most plastic at a younger age, right? I mean, kids who learn a language at a young age tend to understand and have that language stick with them much more easily and much more strongly than an adult trying to learn a new language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I suspect that's probably, similar for a sport or an athletic endeavor. Training your body to swing at a pitch at a young age probably will, help your brain get accustomed to knowing what a pitch is supposed to look like and knowing the rapid timing of how a swing is supposed to meet the
Mm-hmm.
ball at the right time. But
Yeah.
obviously, sports change and get more complex as you get older, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot, you know, my 7-year-old little league, my 7-year-old son's little league, getting soft toss pitches. It's a nice step in the direction of, you know, recognizing how a ball is supposed to come to you and how you're supposed to swing. But
Mm.
it's that experience is not going to necessarily help him, when he's facing 95-mile-an-hour pitches
Yeah.
10 years down the road. So, sports it changes and it gets more complex. And so the brain has to have a continued, development in order to
Mm-hmm.
counter those changes. But
Yeah.
I think the bigger point here is, again, it's like the muscles, the workouts that the athletes do, and even these, as I said, the scouting combine that is all about quantifying and analyzing athletes based on how big and strong and how fast they are. It's fine, but it's really missing the bigger point and the
Mm-hmm.
and the larger contributor, the larger factor in what is defining of great performers.
Yeah, for sure. The thing that really inspired me to start this exploration of what separates elite athletes from others was watching Fernando Mendoza go on his Heisman run and seeing him in these specific situations, which were, the intense pressure that he was under, and that all Heisman Trophy winners are under it. All elite athletes come under at some point, which is why we talked to Olympic athletes some previous episodes to get a sense of what was going on in their heads at that moment when the whole world is watching. It fascinates me to see how someone like Fernando Mendoza can have 100,000 people screaming at them and knowing not only that you have to win the game and do this for your team, but knowing that there's this other thing, the Heisman Trophy, that if you screw up, you could lose it, and this is something that could change your whole life. And so it got me thinking, are the brains of elite athletes, are they better built for pressure, or are they just better trained for it, do you think?
It's probably in some sense both. I mean, I think, certainly the world of sports psychology has grown exponentially in the last maybe 15 or 20 years, in which, athletes and teams today have therapists and sports psychologists on staff that are training, these athletes like Mendoza to be able to better handle and prepare themselves for the pressures of what they're going to encounter. And I think that's been a huge factor in, athletes being able to deliver in clutch situations. But I think there might be a cognitive component there. I mean, I remember interviewing a neuroscientist at Johns Hopkins, and he actually studies stroke and stroke recovery. And um, a big factor in stroke recovery is in the contributions to what happens to a stroke and how you recover from it is dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter. It's kind of considered like our happy neurotransmitter. It helps us feel good, and it's actually a really big contributor into muscle movement and how quickly we can move our muscles. And what he found was that basically when the brain supplies these little squirts of dopamine, we can actually move faster than we ever thought we could. And sometimes this happens in like the fight or flight reflex.
Hmm.
When we are responding, when adrenaline kicks in, we can move faster than even we thought was possible. And what the neuroscientist was telling me was that, in certain situations, athletes might, thrive, might like that pressure situation. It might give them a squirt of dopamine, right? And that squirt of
Yeah.
dopamine, that neurotransmitter that's happening in their brain, can actually make their muscles move a little bit quicker than they normally would. It gives them a little pep in
Hmm.
their step. It boosts them. And so,
Interesting.
part of it again might be psychology, that they have to
Yeah.
train themselves to embrace the situation, to embrace the pressure, but once they do, it can actually and it contributes to a little pep boost of dopamine. Yeah, it could actually be be what the difference maker
Hmm.
in how muscles respond and how you actually move faster and play better. Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I'm not sure that's totally definitive, but it's an interesting way to think about why or how certain athletes can respond in
Hmm.
certain situations.
There's lots of schools of thought on how to identify talent early, how to train young athletes. Do you think early specialization helps build elite neural circuits, or does it narrow them too soon?
Yeah, you know, I mean, there's obviously two schools of thought on this around generalization and specialization, and I think I'm always hesitant, or I don't like to say that I'm in favor of specialization over generalization. I think it's important for kids to play a lot of sports and expose themselves to different sports and not bog themselves down with just playing football, and only football from a young age. I'm not sure that is healthy or beneficial for them,
Hmm.
but it's probably harmful physically. It's probably what could lead to injury, right? And could, wear bodies down in a in a faster manner. I think that's probably what is, the real downside to specialization.
Mm-hmm.
From a brain standpoint, like I said earlier, the more you expose yourself to the scenarios and the situations that you're expecting to encounter in a game, the better prepared your brain is going to be able to handle those situations and to know what to do. And so from that standpoint, I do think specialization is probably beneficial, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of similarities between being a basketball point guard and a quarterback, but they're not the same,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, being a point guard in basketball in the winter can help you in some ways, but it's probably not going to really uh, transfer to uh, decision making and processing,
Mm-hmm.
and like I said, memorizing those scenes that are unfolding in front of you on a football field,
Mm-hmm.
um, or at least it's so. So I think that's where my hesitation around generalization resides. I
Uh-huh.
think the specialization of sports is from a brain standpoint, um, is probably beneficial. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the the plasticity and the way that our brains are so, what I like to say, and I wrote about this in the book, your brain is not, our brains weren't built for being baseball players, right? Your brains are constantly, that's not all that they are there for. Right. Even though it might seem that Fernando Mendoza was born to play football and, and thinks and eats and breathes football all the time, he still is also walking around in the morning, eating breakfast,
Yeah.
driving his car, doing other things that, and your brain is involved with all those things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Mm-hmm.
constantly soaking up, environmental cues and making decisions on a moment by moment basis. Right.
Yeah.
And so it is doing all those things. And so what it has to be able to do is when he gets on the football field, when he gets under center, his brain locks in and says, I know what's
Mm-hmm.
going to happen here. This is what I've been trained to do. I know these situations. I remember them from the playbook. I remember them from watching video, and I know where my teammates are, and I can make decisions quickly when linebackers are coming at my
Mm-hmm.
head.
Yeah.
It has to be able to move from, the looking around in the stands or getting ready before the game to it has to be able to lock in really quickly.
Yeah.
And so, I think that getting to that point, a certain amount of specialization,
Mm-hmm.
um, is it required? No, but it's probably helpful.
Yeah. It sounds to me like you're talking about uh, thousands of reps or thousands of reps in the right perceptual environment are kind of more important because let's say Fernando Mendoza might have all these reps in the context of playing football. Maybe his decision making may not necessarily his skill at decision making in the football field may not necessarily transfer over to life necessarily, right? Because it's the environment in which he was trained. Unless he trains himself rigorously in these aspects of life, maybe his decision making won't be as good necessarily in those areas, right?
Yeah, I mean, probably not. I mean, I don't think just because he can make decisions, throwing to wide receivers really quickly, I don't think that helps him when he's crossing the street, necessarily more, at least not more than just his normal reflexes and his
Mm-hmm.
muscular, his muscular reflexes could help him. Um, no, but there is um, there's a certain amount of intelligence required for memorizing a playbook,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's not an easy thing to do. It's not something that everyone can do, and especially these quarterbacks that are going from one team to another, or hopping around from school to school, learning new playbooks, learning new teammates, and learning new habits. I mean, that's a skill in itself. And so, that's all, yeah, I mean, that's unusual, an unusual ability.
Hmm. Why do you think society is still more comfortable calling a chess player brilliant than calling a point guard or a quarterback brilliant?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think there's long been an unfortunate stereotype about the dumb jock, and I think that's partly because athletes are just, they're not articulate about what makes them great, right? And that's just it's not their fault. It's hard to explain what makes an athlete do what he does. I like I said, I was used to be a sports writer. I was in locker rooms asking athletes questions after every game, and I saw brilliant moves, brilliant abilities, skills, and talents on the field and on the court. And you'd ask a player, "How did you do that?" Right? And they say, "I don't know. I just did it. It just
Yeah.
happened. It came to me naturally." And it's an unsatisfying answer. And I think it can often contribute to sort of a perception that they are just incapable of putting into words or stringing enough words together
Mhm.
to summarize what makes them great. But that's it's not really their fault. And what I think is what we've already talked about, and what the thrust of the performance cortex was understanding that the cognitive demands that are required of an athlete to perform at that highest level are just as impressive as a chess player, right? Chess grandmaster trying to perform. It's a different arena, it's a different skill, but what athletes are able to do is a form of athletic intelligence. And the greatest ones, the LeBron James, the Tom Brady's, yeah, they're geniuses. I mean, they really are. And just because they can't explain why, it's that's unfair to consider them dumb.
Yeah.
I think that we have to reinterpret what dumb actually means.
Yeah. And of course, everything is about storytelling, which is why, sports culture has maybe over romanticized grit and underappreciated things like neural development. Is that something that in the course of writing your book and afterwards, do you think this is something that is starting to be more appreciated, more of a sea change in sports psychology and sports development?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. We've seen, the Wonderlic test used to be a real joke in football, but they have tried to do better scouting with sort of psychological or somewhat more neuroscience based testing. And there's been some efforts by certain teams, by some teams, to try and, like I said, get under the hood a little bit better, to understand what these athletes are doing. And I already mentioned the psychology component, bringing mental coaches
Mm,
and therapists into clubhouses and preparing athletes for the psychological demands that they're after. But it's still, as I said at the top. I mean, the unfortunately the technology just isn't quite there yet to be able to bring, the ideal would be bringing an EEG cap, or an even better MRI imaging equipment that is mobile, that a player can wear
mm,
underneath their helmet, or in the batting cage or on the practice field, to really get the sense of what's happening when they are doing what they do. But there's also, it's not all just the teams and the that are or the science community that is holding this back. The players too, understandably, are hesitant about putting themselves into science labs and becoming guinea pigs for science experiments. From their standpoint, they're already pretty good at what they do. They don't need to explain it. They don't need to know why.
yeah,
They're already they just do it. So, it'd be helpful for the scouts, it'd be helpful for the coaches, for the athletes, maybe not. So I think there's a gap there between what athletes want, what teams want, and what we as fans or curious science writers like
sure,
myself want.
yeah.
So But hopefully, as time goes on, we'll find some common ground and get get some more overlap and coordination there.
Yeah,
That'd be the
and
goal.
maybe people don't want to share their secret sauce. Who knows? As it turns out,
Right,
but
right,
so
right.
after all your reporting, and after some perspective, a few years now, what do you now believe is the biggest hidden ingredient in how elite athletes are made?
I mean, it's hard to limit it to just one. I mean, I think probably decision making, rapid decision making, which incorporates a lot of different elements and a different brain regions that are responsible for that decision making. But being decisive uh, more quickly than other people is a really big factor. We saw this in baseball a lot. It hasn't really been studied too much in other sports, but I think baseball is a pretty good um, a good arena to look at this. And this was the company that I was following for a few years that I wrote about the Cerebro. They were looking at decision making and hitters, and it's a good it's a good way to do it because baseball hitting is one single decision, right? It is I'm either going to swing at this pitch or I'm not going to swing at this pitch. Um, and even if you don't swing, there's still a decision happening. There's no physical component because you don't swing, but in the brain, there's still a decision happening that I don't want to swing at that pitch. I'm gonna decide to lay off. And so what the neuroscientists found is that baseball hitters were just better and faster at making accurate decisions than normal control subjects.
Yeah.
And that is a function of, seeing a lot of pitches over a lot of time and understanding what looks good or what looks bad to them. And so there's a recognition component, there's a memory component, there's also, sure, there's a physical component, being able to swing, knowing that you can swing fast enough to hit a pitch that's coming at you. But I think if it was me and I was trying to understand or use neuroscience to understand what makes a great quarterback or what makes a great point guard as they're running a fast break, it is how quickly they can decide to make a
Hmm.
pass, swing at a pitch. So
Yeah.
that's to me that's a key factor.
Yeah. I like to geek out on Robert Sapolsky. I don't know if you ever listened to his lectures, but he talks a lot about how the brain, makes the decision before you think you're holding the cup, but your brains are they tested it, and the brain's made the decision before you told your hand to touch the cup.
Right.
Did you
Right.
talk to any neuroscientists about that aspect of things? Is it really decision making in a real sense when there's this sort of determinative thing going on? The brain's making the decision for you, kind of.
You're getting very
Yeah,
philosophical.
yeah. Well, just no thoughts on that, or was there any did any neuroscientists talk about that aspect when you were talking to them for the book?
I don't remember talking to neuroscientists. But I remember reading about a lot of the theories around this. Yeah, I mean there is a lag between what your brain is, doing or what your brain is signaling and the time that it takes to reach your muscles, right? There is it has to send a signal from here down to the hands to be able to swing the bat, right? And
Mm,
that takes time. I mean, it's on the order of, hundreds of the millisecond, so it's very fast, but it's when you're facing a pitch that's coming 95 miles an hour, that is it's a big chunk of your time that you have to be able to to send that signal. One of the most interesting things that I found in my reporting and it gets a little bit back to the nature versus nurture debate as well, is that a lot of times those signals are not totally clear. Okay,
hmm.
you're firing signals along a pathway through the spinal cord and out to the periphery through motor neurons, motor nerve cells. And it's a chain of command that has to go through, and there is sometimes interference or noise that can disrupt that signal. And it's why it's very hard to move things to move things in a still manner and to
Mm.
precisely repeat what you're doing. It's why there is a game called darts, right? We're not just robots. If we could all move smoothly, without interference the same way every time, then we would just throw bullseyes every single time. But that's not the way our body works. There was always some sort of imperfection in our movements, and a lot of times that can be pinpointed on just the tiniest bit of interference or noise in that signaling from the brain to the hands. Now, what's in or to the rest of the body, I should say. What's interesting, and again, going back to the nature versus nurture debate, is that it's not unclear, or I should say, it's it's possible that certain people are just born with clearer signals, right? Or signaling pathways, are born with less noise in their bodily systems that is less disruptive of those signals from the brain to the periphery. And that clearness, the lack of noise, contributes to better coordination and a more, I guess, a smoothness of movement that others might not have. It's not, it's theoretical at this point, but if you think that all of us have some amount of noise in our signaling mechanism, there might be some people who have less or more. That's just kind of the way things work. And so it's possible that those people who have less, maybe at a younger age, they figured out that they're more coordinated and could move better and things were easier for them. So they got into sports at a younger age, and that, and then developed from there. But it's, the noise and the signaling, it's, when you actually think about it, it's it takes time, and the signals are not always clear.
This is just fascinating stuff. I could talk about it forever, but I got to let you go. Zach Schombrun, thanks for coming on the show and discussing this great topic. It was so insightful, really interesting stuff. His book is The Performance Cortex: How Neuroscience is Redefining Athletic Genius. You can go on Amazon.com and various other book places and pick that up. Be sure to read it. Zach, thanks for coming on the show.
Chris, thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Hi, this is Billy Sims, 1978 Heisman Trophy winner. You are listening to the official Heisman Trophy podcast. Boomer!
All right, Max Brown of ESPN is a former college quarterback, played at USC and Pitt. He runs a very successful channel named Max Brown 04, I believe. It's at Max Brown 04 on YouTube and all the different platforms. Just a bunch of great content there. College football, even going in some other areas of crossover into other parts of culture. Been on the show twice before. Max, how's it going? Welcome back.
It's good to be back. Yeah, happy to be here for a third time. Thanks for having me, Chris.
No problem. You recently did a piece of content, and by the way, everyone should go check out Max's stuff. He just keeps turning out fantastic, insightful pieces. Really great piece on the Strait of Hormuz crisis recently, but this one in particular, I want to talk about. I'm going to play the video real quick right here.
For a long time, obsession was the edge. But now, I'm not so sure. I grew up on this mindset. Never be satisfied, never off. And to be honest, looking back, at a certain point, that worked against me. Internally, no work was ever enough. I would overanalyze everything. And I wasn't great at separating from my sport. Then we recently see guys like Jokic and Scottie Scheffler become the best in the world. And they don't look obsessed. Yeah, they're committed, but they're relaxed. Still competitive, still elite, but not consumed. And in 2026, that matters even more, because when Kobe and Tiger stepped away from the cameras, the noise could stop. Now, the moment you open your phone, you're back in the arena. The highlights, the takes, the noise, there's no off switch anymore. So maybe the edge isn't obsession. Maybe it's knowing how to step away.
Okay, so Max, the Mamba mentality and the new kind of athlete we talked about on the show a lot, Fernando Mendoza, and how he is one of these guys who has a lot of interests, and this did not seem to to hurt his development. And you talked about Alyssa Liu in this video and Scotty Scheffler. Tell me about like what you think about what got you to thinking about this whole concept of this new type of athlete.
Yeah, it started just as an observation. I mean, I'm 31 years old, so I grew up in the what I call the Mamba mentality generation, where the role models were Tiger Woods, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, and those all those guys were cut from a similar cloth, at least from an outsider's perspective, in terms of their work ethic and how they approached the game. They approached it in a ruthless mentality, a like I'm here to dominate you. But to take it even a step further, they approached it in a way where, if you had any other interests outside of your sport, or if you weren't pedal to the metal all the time, well, there was a connotation that then you weren't all the way in your sport.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I'm not sitting here saying I'm Tom Brady, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, but I think I approached my athletic career with that kind of mentality. And when I reflect on my athletic career, which did not end successfully. I was the number one quarterback in the country coming out of high school, but did not have a successful college career, relatively speaking. When I reflect, I'm like, man, I wish I was able to turn off more. I wish I wasn't so intense all the time. I wish, I didn't feel the need to stay an extra hour after every practice to make sure I was getting extra work in. And then, oh, by the way, as I get older and, I'm removing myself from my sport, again, 31 years old, I have like 9 former teammates still in the NFL. Are those 9 guys the hardest workers when I was at USC and Pitt? Not necessarily. They weren't slappies by any means, but the common theme with a lot of those guys, or all those guys, different personalities, they all had fun. They all showed up to practice and played football. They didn't work football. And you mentioned Scotty Scheffler, and then the observation happened when Scotty and Nikola Jokic really went to the peak of the sports world and call it 2021 or so. I was like, that is the polar opposite of the Tiger Woods, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant mentality. And yet they're the best players in their sport. And not to make this super long-winded, but I think it's especially relevant in the digital age that we're in, where every single time you open up your phone, I'm getting fed sports content. So when you're living it as an athlete, there really is no off switch. You're constantly having to consume your sport. And so the take here is I think it's a superpower, it's a benefit, it's a skill for athletes to be able to turn off and remove themselves from their sport, rather than, again, being all football all the time, 24/7. I think that can be a recipe to, like, I'm not saying don't work hard, but it can be a recipe for literally not playing your sport as well because you lose the fun and the joy aspect of it.
Yeah. Where do you think this idea came from that you have to whittle it all down to this one thing? Obviously, you talked about Jordan and Kobe, and this was the image that they projected, and this is everyone talked about how Jordan would play a game and then he'd go lift weights right afterwards, that kind of thing. This kind of crazy psychotic dedication, but at say the youth level or at the middle school level, like when does that switch get turned on, and who's turning on that switch, or is it just something you just come across on your own?
That's a good question. I would say probably parents mostly drive that. Like, I'm old enough where I have 3 older brothers, and so I've got I don't have kids myself, but I've got exposure to kind of what that youth sports, AAU, travel ball culture is like. And yeah, parents are crazy, and I'm fascinated by it because when you're observing another parent, everyone's like, "Oh yeah, those people are crazy." But then when you're the parent, it's like, "No, I'm just being a great parent and I'm advocating for my kid." And it's a funny like double standard there. So to answer your question directly, I think the parents are driving that. For me, in my own personal experience, my parents were amazing. I remember I've had Pat Narduzzi and Steve Sarkisian to varying degrees be like, "Oh, Max, you don't have a quarterback dad." And those in the football world know that the quarterback dad is usually the dad that's, head of the booster club, sitting at the 50-yard line, living vicariously through their kid, and their identity is based upon the success that their son or daughter, but their son quarterback is having. My dad was much more low key, off in the shadows kind of thing. Still advocated for my sports journey and the whole deal. So I was lucky I didn't have that set up. But for me, again, 5-star quarterback in high school, was on that trajectory since, as much as early as I can remember. Things ramped up for me, like 7th grade was the marker where it was, you're old enough in my community to be like, all right, we get like, you have some talent here. This is clearly different than your peers. But then young enough where you're still like ahead of it. Like 7th grade, still young. Don't get me wrong. But at that point, I was able to be like, all right, I was playing up a year. So I was the quarterback in the 8th grade team. And then I could see who the quarterback was at the 9th grade level. And I was like, all right, give me a couple of years to mature. And by my sophomore year of high school, I think I can start there. And so, yeah, that was the age where it ramped up, and it came from, I had a little push from my parents, but nothing crazy. But then inside for me, I kind of always had that drive, and was fortunate enough to have the supporting cast around me to kind of channel that drive and ramp it up at that age.
There's a lot of talk recently, recent years, I guess, about mental health amongst athletes, especially, we've seen a lot of openness and discussion on these issues, and it seems like burnout is the root of a lot of these things. Not just the pressure is there. Some of these athletes are so competitive that they grind so hard that there's this internal pressure on top of the external pressure. Is burnout the main issue when it comes to this focus, this mentality, this Mamba mentality? Is burnout kind of the main problem with taking that approach?
It's a good question. I think it's an aspect of it. But to me, it was like, for me, in my experience, it was more, I wasn't burnt out of football. Like, I truly loved football. I was the teenager that could come home and watch, NFL Network rather than, Nickelodeon and Disney Channel. To me, it was more just, it was never enough. Like, I was my own worst critic, like more of that. Like, if I stayed after to throw 30 extra routes, it was like, oh, well, why didn't you throw 60? And hey, we had a great week of lifts. Well, you could have added one more lift. Or, oh, you had that extra ice cream sundae. Oh, well, you're going to pay for that in the fall. Like, kind of that train of thought that I struggled to get out of. And then also the own worst critic a little bit, where it was, again, like, I was never the type of athlete that I needed a coach to like get on my ass. Sure, during like conditioning and stuff like that, but like, never the show up on time, hustle through the line, any of that stuff. And so I guess it was just this cycle of, for me, I when I look back on my playing career, I was never able to just get into flow state in my college career. I played some good ball at times, but never truly just going out there and doing it. And maybe that's just me, but I think that's where I go more with, like, I look at some of my former teammates, and I'm envious of the guys that could do their work hard, but then when it's time to play football, let's play football. You make a mistake, all good. Let's get back to it. Like that's what that's what the game's all about. And they never went to that like 4th or 5th or 6th level of analyzation that I feel like I did with this mentality.
Do you think that if you had been, let's say, a really good pianist in high school, in addition to a quarterback, would that have scared Lane Kiffin away, thinking that, would there have been whispers that Max Brown isn't that dedicated to football or being a quarterback or being great?
It's funny. That specific example, I probably not. I think it probably would have been viewed as like as cool and unique, but it is funny just how much the sports world's changed. When LeBron started venturing off and doing some of the acting and some of the businesses back in like 2012, 13, 14, it was like, look at this guy. Who does he think he is? He's checked out. Like, oh, he's not all the way in on NBA, because people were used to the Kobe Jordan mentality. Nowadays, it's almost weird and looked down upon if you're an athlete and you're not leveraging your brand for business opportunities and all that. And of course, LeBron had to be the guy that takes the brunt of that, so then the new generation can not get criticism for that. But I look back on my career and playing basketball. I played hoops in high school. One of the best things that I did. And not only from a athletic standpoint, which, if you want to be a better quarterback, I don't care who you are, play basketball. It's great. Like, that will literally be more beneficial for you, in my opinion, taking 3 months out of the year to play hoop rather than an extra 3 months of quarterback training. I just think you become a better athlete. But where it's slept on is, for me, from a mental health aspect, to be able to turn off the football door for or shut the football door for 4 months and go compete in a different arena. Like, to me, prime time basketball games on Friday nights against my rival from like a pressure anxiety was nothing compared to the football side of things. And I think that was so great for my mental health. And not to go down a rabbit hole, but I think I got the offer from Oklahoma back in the day because they saw me play basketball. So it can work to your advantage as well.
I guess it depends on the coach, the recruiters. Some coaches like someone who does a lot of different things, right, in high school, different activities. Maybe some are not as much into that. Does it just depend on kind of the luck of the draw of who falls in love with you as a player?
I think nowadays, I don't know. I've never met a single coach that looks down on pursuing other sports for sure. Like whether that's even that's baseball, track, basketball, soccer. I've literally never met a coach once that looks down upon that. And it's funny because, again, then you look at parents and it's like, oh, well, then we got to play year-round baseball. Well, it's like I've never met a coach that says that. Maybe football is different in that regard, but I don't think so. In terms of like other activities, like what comes to mind is the famous Jaylen Brown on the Celtics criticism, where he was a wicked smart Cal student and interested in like math, I believe it was, or maybe international relations, and it was looked at as like a negative in the draft. To me, I think that's just like a convenient headline talking point. I don't think any decision maker is true. I guess it's all relative. It's all relative. I mean, it's relative related to the mental makeup of the athletes, but I can't remember a single athlete that I've crossed paths with where that's truly viewed as a negative. It's just, it's viewed as hey, they're a more equipped human being.
Right. And I guess what we're really talking about is, from our perspective on this show, is what separates elite athletes from, good athletes or regular athletes. Fernando Mendoza winning the Heisman, he's a well-rounded guy, a couple degrees, doing internships, talking about stoicism. If he'd been doing all that stuff and he had been touted about all those things, his interests, and, he had, let's say, did not come through with that drive against Penn State, or could not come up with the plays when he had to do it against Ohio State, would they have said, well, if only, if he hadn't been so focused on those things, maybe he would have won? Is it just one of those things where these types of athletes are going to have to keep proving themselves, or have we broken the mold finally and people are just have gotten over this idea that it's either or?
In my opinion, I think we've broken the mold of what I'll call productive or like wholesome interests on the side. To me, as you were asking that question, I think about, all right, Fernando Mendoza, the different degrees, the quirkiness, the other interests, and then Caleb Williams, where it was more of the swag and the bravado and the influencery nature. That to me, I think will still continue to be a criticism. So we've moved away from, hey, the interests, so you like reading or piano or cycling or all that. That's all good to go. But on the flip side, is it, all right, do you crave the attention, the followers? Are you on TikTok? Are you getting distracted by things that could be detrimental to your mental makeup if you're getting looped into the likes and the Instagram models and all of that? That to me is the new age. That to me is the thing that coaches and general managers are going to have to assess, because Caleb Williams may have been one of the first. He certainly is not going to be the last, especially when you see athletes that are changing their lives as a result of leveraging their personal brands. I think about that guy on the Oklahoma City Thunder that's dancing on TikTok all the time, and he's like a role player. I'm blanking on his name. But like, you can criticize that and say, oh, are you all in on basketball? All that. That dude's life is on a different trajectory than every other role player at his status, and he's going to be able to do whatever he wants basketball adjacent the second that the Oklahoma City Thunder ultimately cut him. And it's kind of a trade-off. It's a savvy business move, but in the short term, does it hurt your basketball career? That to me is like the decision and the weighing that both athletes, coaches, general managers are going to have to make over the next decade or so.
Yeah. And do you think some of these young athletes, or I should say, the athletes of today versus the athletes of 10 years ago, like when you were in high school, that was just the beginning of the social media era, really kind of expanding to the general population, right? Some of these things had Facebook had been at colleges, and then I think it moved over to the general population in 2008, and then it sort of trickled out, and then Twitter was still pretty young around then. So we're talking about a decade now of being bombarded with the algorithm, with all these things coming at you. Are these athletes also just better equipped to handle these things now, and so therefore maybe they can handle all these things and still be great athletes?
Yeah, there's two sides to that. It's a good question because, I see the studies from, the Wall Street Journal about anxiety and depression levels increasing. But I also can remember back to when I played. So 13 to 16, like you said, it's right when Instagram was taking off and you could kind of see where the digital world was heading. And I remember so many self-development team meetings that we had were about like, be careful. You never know who's got an iPhone. Everyone could be filming you. You never know when you're at a party, like how that's going to go down. And I think when we reflect on that 10 years later, you don't really see that many college kids getting in trouble for going crazy, for some, random iPhone footage that they get. Or you don't see some kid like getting, in the grand scheme of things, like for terrible text messages here or there, or sending a picture they shouldn't have sent. Like those are few and far between, relatively speaking, compared to, I think, how we talked about it 10 years ago. So I do think you're right of the athletes today are, or they just grow up with it. So it's their norm, and in a way they're better equipped to it. It's not to downplay the anxiety, depression dynamics to that, but I think there is some truth that like that's all they know. So yeah, they are better at dealing with it.
Yeah. Do you think we've come close to the point where the remaining athletes that still subscribe to that Mamba mentality might eventually be at a bit of a disadvantage if more athletes are becoming well-rounded, and it's I think I've seen some studies suggesting that having a well-rounded personality, well-rounded interests enables creates space for the athlete to develop in other ways, or it lets them evolve differently than they typically might. Are we moving in that direction now, or is it just little one-offs that we're seeing, or do you think it's generally a trend that's going on?
My take on this is it's not a trend either way. I think it's so dependent on the specific athlete. So I think the Michael Jordans, the Kobe Bryants, they're going to be successful in whatever generation that they're in. Tiger Woods is in that bucket as well. Scottie Scheffler, Nikola Jokic, they're going to be successful in whatever generation. To me, it's more the middle zone where, again, the people that fall into like the performance anxiety bucket, which I look back and I think I was the type of quarterback that fell into that bucket. I had more of the Mamba mentality wiring and could have used more of the Scottie Scheffler, Nikola Jokic. That being said, as we all know, there's plenty of athletes that say they have the Scottie Scheffler, Nikola Jokic mentality of like, man, I'm out here just hooping. Like, we'll see. And they probably could use more Kobe Bryant, Tiger Woods, Tom Brady, Mamba mentality. And so it's just so dependent on the specific kid. But I think if we are looking at one trend, I think getting out of, and I always feel bad because obviously Kobe's passed, and I think the Mamba mentality started from a great place of work ethic, holding yourself accountable, discipline is a positive. But then I watched it firsthand. I think we took it too far, and there are threads that lead to some of the performance anxiety type of dynamics that impact certain kids, aren't even on other kids' radar one bit at all.
Yeah. Well, if you were talking to a 16-year-old Max Brown right now and talking to him about his future and giving him some advice about how, advice that will help that young man develop at the rate that is best for him, what would you tell him? Like, what would you say for him to focus on, and what would you tell him to think about as he was preparing, for his career?
A few things. I would hammer home, have fun every single day of the week. And it sounds so basic, but I think that can get lost with high level athletes where, like, in my mind, I knew, hey, it's football. It's a blessing. It's fun, but it still felt so, it felt intense. And not that I wasn't up for that. Like I kind of enjoyed that intensity, but I think at a certain point, yeah, like we've talked about it hurt the way, hurt the play on the field for me. I think I would also try to preach that, like, hey, when you're going on this athletic journey, it's all upside. Like, literally, there's articles written about me that I'm one of the biggest college football busts ever. Yet my life is forever in a better place because of the game of football. Like, that's amazing. And so I think when you come at it from that mindset, it can take pressure off of you. We're like, all right, yeah, my college career was not ideal at all. Yet what football gave me was still amazing. And then 3, because my wife and I talk about this, she was a Division I athlete as well. Like, if we ever did have big time athletes as kids, like, so I had a strength coach growing up, like with my team, and then I had a private quarterback coach as well. I probably would have had a sports psychologist early on, like in high school. The second that you realize, hey, you're on this trajectory to being a big time athlete, start it now. And I may have rolled my eyes at my parents and been like, what the heck? What are we doing here? But the reason that I'd advocate it before, like earlier on, is because for me, I saw a sports psychologist my redshirt freshman year and redshirt sophomore year after I got benched, after I lost a quarterback competition at USC.
Yeah.
And then lost a second one. And then I was like, oh, wow, I need to see a sports psych. And you go in with the mentality that, like, something's wrong and I need to be fixed, rather than if it's just part of your strength coach, your private quarterback coaching, where it's part of the athlete. This is the muscle that we're developing. I don't think it comes from a place of like, ooh, something's wrong. It's crisis panic mode. It's just, nope, this is part of my process. This is part of my toolkit. And developing it that way, probably 3 years, 4 years earlier than I did, was probably the way to go. And it's also like, I think my parents probably were like, all right, we have a kid who's like intense and like he's in this thing. For another kid who's like maybe not that way, and we need to focus on getting them to the weight room in the beginning, all right, well then maybe it's a different conversation, and it's obviously dependent on each individual kid.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, how old were you when someone first said that you had a good arm, or that you could really throw the ball well?
Ooh, probably 3rd, 4th grade. I remember playing tackle football, and my team was the only team in the league that threw the football. And then it was like, ooh, yeah, this is something different. Yeah, as early as that, which is crazy because I have a nephew who's in 4th grade. I'm like, this guy's like a baby.
Yeah. But someone was saying that because, parents tell their kids, oh, you're doing so good. But when did you actually hear that and believe it? You know what I mean? Not just think it was just someone, being encouraging.
It went in phases. Like I can remember elementary school recess, like literally the first recess, balls rolled out, we're picking teams. I was just a captain in 2nd grade recess. And then again, I was the quarterback on my team, 3rd, 4th grade, and my team was the only team that played. So I think I always knew I was good. I think where it went the next level is I had a quarterback coach who had trained other guys that ultimately made it Division I. And not to go down a rabbit hole, but my older brother was the state player of the year in the state of Washington, but then ended up playing Division III football, and he was a quarterback. And so in my little bubble, it was like, all right, like D1, like, not that it wasn't possible, but it was just, that was kind of like, oh, crazy. Like that's the dream. And then when I was in, I think 7th, 8th grade, I had a quarterback coach that had trained some Division I guys and was like, yeah, I think you have something here. And if we stay at it, like, it's not crazy to think that you could be getting scholarship offers here in a couple of years. And was fortunate enough that happened. And, but like, that was when I was like, oh yeah, this is different now. This is legit.
Yeah. 12,951 yards, 146 touchdowns at Skyline High.
Good times, man.
National Gatorade Player of the Year, and 3-time Heisman Trophy podcast guest, Max Brown. You're always so candid and honest, and just a great analysis, and appreciate you coming on and lending your thoughts on this topic. And good luck in the fall, doing more stuff with ESPN and with your channel, and have a great summer.
Appreciate it, Chris. Yeah, this topic lights my heart up. It's fun talking about this. Get a break from just the standard football take. So I appreciate it. I'm sure we'll be back chatting in a few months when the next football season's upon us.
This is Mike Krzyzewski, and you're listening to the official Heisman Trophy podcast.
All right. right. So far this offseason, we've explored the themes of what are the origins of elite athleticism. So far this year, we've talked to great athletes from all realms of the sports world. We've talked to coaches like Kurt Signetti and Lincoln Riley. We've talked to journalists and neuroscientists. And now I think it's about time we actually talk to one of these athletes who is at the early stage of development. I'm talking about Davis Wilson. In this case, he is a 2027 right-handed pitcher, a current commit to the Vanderbilt Commodores. He's out of Clovis North High in Fresno, California. Great sports town, of course. Davis is the number one ranked 2027 pitcher in the state of California, the number 30 overall prospect nationally, receiving Major League Baseball draft buzz. He's a two-time underclass area codes and prep baseball All-American Games participant, and he will likely be joining the inaugural Jason Kidd Select National Summer Team this coming summer. Right-handed pitcher, 6'3", 193, 17 years old. I hear he's a good hitter too. Davis, welcome to the Heisman Trophy podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad we can connect, and I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, it's not typical that we have a baseball player on the Heisman Trophy podcast, but this is not a typical off season for us. We're talking to all kinds of interesting people from all walks of life in sports this off season. And I guess what I really want to know from you is I want to know about your athletic journey, how you got to the point that you did. Just tell me off the bat, like what do you remember from your earliest stages about your exposure to sports? Like, when did you first pick up a ball? What really started interesting you about athletics?
It really started when, obviously T-ball. I was around 3 years old. Parents put me into T-ball, as well as soccer. I kind of just played every sport that I could growing up. Like, I swam, I did wrestling, I played soccer, I played football, I ran cross country. Like, any sport that was available to me in elementary school, I did.
Mhm.
And it just like, it helped me learn like so many different traits from each one.
Mhm.
But it also just, I wasn't the type of kid to kind of just sit around. I wanted to go do something. And I think playing all those sports really helped my social life, along with like making friends. And I mean, it's just like, why not? Why wouldn't I go do it?
Yeah.
But just playing any sport that I could possibly have played is kind of
Mhm.
how I just got into it. And as I got later into high school, it just became football and baseball. And then as of this year, now it's just baseball. But I'm really grateful that I was able to, play all those sports
Mhm.
for the amount of time I did.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
Were you good at those sports, or did you just play them whether you were good or not?
Well, I don't like losing. So
Yeah.
when I was doing I was putting a lot of effort, into it. So I would say I was pretty good.
Mhm.
Soccer, it's what I learned. It's not too much. You just have to, they put me at the striker position. And I would just run around and cause hell for the guys on the defenders. And
Yeah.
football taught me a lot of leadership. I was able to, as a sophomore, kind of take over the varsity role as a quarterback. And so I was the youngest of all the guys. I got all these linemen that are 6'5", 280, and they're looking up to me. And it's
Yeah.
so it put a lot of pressure on me. But I think that, even being the youngest, I still felt that some guys, looked up to me.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's just, I love competing. So, like in each one of those sports, like I said, I don't like losing. So, I put my all effort into it. I'm not just going out there to, look at dandelions in the outfield and the grass or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I would say I wasn't the best, but I wasn't
Yeah.
bad at them.
Right. Right.
But
I've seen your early tapes. Been following you for a while. Your various social media platforms. You're an athletic kid. You obviously have a lot of abilities to do a whole range of sports. I've seen you do the whole range of sports. Your dad was, state champion level wrestler. Your grandpa, I believe, played at Kentucky football, right? And your
Yes.
uncle played Stanford cornerback at Stanford, and so you have a athletic heritage around your family. Was there a bit of a tug between these different sports? Was one side saying, "Hey, you should get into football," or once? I mean, I think you didn't. You talked about the things you learned from football and soccer, but I would imagine with wrestling, you learned a lot about leverage and how to use your strength and all that kind of thing. Like, describe to me the influence of your family on your ultimate direction with sports?
I mean, we have definitely always been a football family, and um, like as well as with wrestling, like I would say that my mom and dad are really supportive of kind of whatever I choose, and of course they have their opinions, but I'm grateful that they kind of just let me do my own thing. So when
Mm-hmm.
it came down to wrestling, like I know that's my dad's heart and soul, and he loved getting back in the wrestling room and training with me, um, reliving his glory days. Or, but so my parents are, they kind of just, hey, if like I wanted to quit baseball right now and start drawing and doing art or something, they would probably be supportive of it. So I'm very grateful for that. But when it came down to football and baseball, that was probably it was definitely one of the hardest decisions I've ever
Mm-hmm.
made. Uh, just because for me, like I didn't want to feel like I was letting, you know, my uncle or my grandpa down. Um, it's not that like they were forcing it on me, but that's just kind of how I was going over it in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But it was literally like for a week we sat down, me and my parents, and we're on call with my uncle and my grandpa, and it was really just like a family talk and
Mm-hmm.
kind of just weighing over the pros and cons of going into the future of what I really loved to do, right? I
Yeah.
love playing football, I love being out there with all my friends, that's the sport they all play, but I really loved baseball. So that is really what the ultimate decision was, is where I saw myself pursuing,
Mm-hmm.
later in the future, and that
Mm-hmm.
just ultimately came down to baseball. But um I'm really grateful that I have a very supportive family around me. That just, hey, go do what you want. We'll be behind your
Mm-hmm.
back, whatever you choose. So
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for that.
Well, it's interesting because baseball is not exactly in the U.S. It's not exactly necessarily as strong of a sport as it used to be as far as the growth aspect of it. So it needs more, I guess, more U.S. born athletes who are into the sport, because there's a lot of great athletes who are coming from outside the U.S. now who are kind of invigorating the sport, and maybe the U.S. aspect of it is not as strong as it used to be. Say, do you think about that? About how, like, especially with younger generations, baseball is not the most popular sport. Do you think that you can maybe go into this thing and try to help revive it from the perspective of your generation?
I think like everybody has kind of someone they look up to, and um, it really just comes down to what they like to do.
Mm-hmm.
For me, and that was baseball. Like, but you can't really blame kids, for choosing football. I mean, it's literally, I mean, but it's hard because baseball is America's pastime, and that's what people always say. But um, I feel like the influence that some of the other sports have had earlier in the social media age has
Mm-hmm.
really, changed the way kids now are thinking of, football and stuff. But I think, like I think baseball, like the MLB, I think they're doing a way better job of into the social media aspect of it. And,
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to make changes to the game to make it more enjoyable, more entertainment with like the ABS system that was added this year.
Mm-hmm.
So um, it won't be just like a one person thing for me, really. And but I think that baseball is definitely, I feel like they were later into the social media
Mhm.
aspect of it. And, now all the kids have Instagram when they're 8 years old and stuff now already. So,
Yeah.
so I think it's definitely progressing forward.
Mhm.
And I think we will see another growth in um, kids in America wanting to play baseball for sure.
Yeah. When did you first realize that you were you can really throw the ball really hard, or that you could pass the football really far? Like when was that revelation point where you're like, oh, I've got a good arm, you know?
I think for baseball, I don't know. Like I was good in rec ball. Like I was the man in rec ball, right? No, but
Yeah.
I don't know. It was kind of just like my arm kind of always stood out a little more than other kids.
Mhm.
Um, but I would say like it wasn't really like something that was like an outlier. I don't know. Like
Mhm.
you would like there's a complex in rec ball and it's just all 4 stadiums, and
Mhm.
I would just the pounding of the glove would start gathering other dads to come watch me throw.
Is that
I
right?
feel like that's a better representation of what it was. But
Did it echo?
I
Did it
just
echo through the park? Like, did it hit the glove and echo like it did
yeah,
in?
it was the wooden backstops, so it was just
Mhm.
you would just hear the pound of it. But
Oh.
so I don't know. I don't want to say like I've always had it, but I don't like. I think I've definitely been I've definitely stood out a little more than other guys since I was younger. But
Mhm. Yeah.
like that translated like I didn't even play quarterback until my freshman year of high school. Like I
Mhm.
was always getting told to go play quarterback, and I was like, well, they already have a guy, so I'll just go play safety. And I was
Mhm.
just gonna go play safety and be a ball hawk and
Yeah.
contain that middle third of the field.
Yeah.
So, but freshman year, like I started actually throwing the ball, and people were like, "Why haven't you done this the whole time?" And I was like, "I don't know. I just
Mhm.
haven't really put any thought into it." But
Yeah.
um, so I kind of just picked up a football, started throwing it, and wherever that took me. And I think what really helped for my baseball arm strength is playing football. Like
Mhm.
it's still like taking that time off in the fall and not picking up a baseball and just throwing however many footballs I did in a day. Like I think
Mhm.
that really helped with the increase in arm strength. And
Yeah.
like I went from going into freshman year, the summer, I was topping 82 on the
Mhm.
mound. I was about, I don't even know, 14, 15. And then
Wow.
that next spring, after playing quarterback for a whole fall, my first time, I was up to 91 in March. And I was
Wow.
like, that's not true. Like I literally told my dad, he was like, I was like, no, that didn't
That's
happen.
quite a
And
jump.
he was like,
That's
dude,
quite a jump.
that's what happened. But yeah,
Yeah.
like, so I think that's also when I started lifting, of course. I never lifted
Yeah.
early on. I
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
waited. There's a bunch of different factors that played into it, but uh, my time in football, I think it definitely increased, some shoulder strength and uh, as well as some mental grit as well. So,
Mhm. Yeah. What's your favorite part about being a baseball player?
ooh, I would say that's tough. There's so many things. Really, I like just kind of the team aspect of it. Uh, I like that it's not always going to be reliant on one guy. And I think just that has taught me to like that I can't always do it on my own kind of thing. And I
Mhm.
have to be able to be reliant on, other people around me sometimes. Um, and I could take that into outside life, whether it's mentally and kind of just like I don't have to sit in my room after a bad outing and try and contain myself and cry and hold it in, and that I could I go sit downstairs with my dad and talk about things and get it out, just move on type of thing.
Mhm.
And um, go hang out with my mom, go to dinner with my mom. Like, you can't always do it on your own. And I think that baseball aspect of it would also translate into, outside life.
Yeah.
That's
You're
one of
really
my
active.
biggest takeaways.
Well, you're really active. You talked about how you couldn't really stay still. You had to go be doing something. But pitchers, you pitch your game, pitch your start, and then you got to take your break. What do you do for a guy who likes to be active doing things? Is that a problem for you? Do you feel restless during those times when you're not slated to pitch?
Well, not really, because I pitch on Tuesdays. The next day, I'll either be at shortstop or second base.
Okay.
So I kind of, so
Well,
yeah. So
that
I
solves
mean,
that. Okay. Yeah.
yeah. So, but yeah, like when I was younger, I was playing every position I can. Like if you told me to go catch right now in our next game, I would do my best that I could at it,
Mhm.
at least. So, when I was younger, I literally played every position, and I think that it gives me a sort of advantage to stay on the field like that. Um,
Mhm.
so if my arms tired a little, I could just go play second base, and
Okay.
that's a Wednesday game, and then we play Friday again. And if my arm's feeling a little healthier, I'll go play shortstop. I have a little bit of stronger arm across the diamond, so uh, but so that kind of me being able to go from pitcher and go right back into the field, like I just played every position I can when I was younger, and
Mhm.
that's just how I was taught. Like I was playing the outfield, I was playing third base, I caught for a year and a half, and I always pitched, so I
So
just
you
really
were
did everything I can.
so you played a lot of sports, and then when you chose your one sport, you played a lot of different positions within that sport. so so
Yeah,
you're
I,
kind of
I didn't I
adapted.
didn't want to come
That's
off
great.
the I didn't want to come off the field, so we have to find a way to stay on the field. So
Yeah. You were heavily recruited by, high major powers in college baseball. You ultimately committed to the Vanderbilt Commodores. Congratulations on that. What were these various scouts and recruiters telling you about yourself? Like beyond the sense of like, them telling you what you kind of need or what they think you need or want to hear so that pick them. Like beyond that, like from the technical aspect, what did they tell you about your experience as an athlete and how it's improved your ability as a pitcher. Did they like that aspect? The fact that you have done all these different things. What did they say about your physical tools? What were some of the things? What was some of the feedback you got during this recruiting process?
um well, the first thing they'll always tell you is you got to put on more weight. So
Mm,
that's usually always the first thing, and
yeah.
they'll take you out, and they'll give you a big dinner, and um so that was always one of the things that they would tell someone. But um it wasn't kind of, I mean, they implied a lot of things, but I think like some of the big takeaways was kind of the mental side of the game, right? So it's hard for them to evaluate that, um just behind a backstop, right? Like, so that they can't really evaluate that, and when they go see 3 innings, but so they kind of just they they taught me it, like they just put it into the back of my mind, um, and those were some of the things that I took into this season was the mental resets when I'm on the mound.
Hmm.
Kind of, so for me, it's take my hat off, swipe the rubber of the mound, and look at the flagpole and take a big deep breath in. Like it's things like that that I was kind of picked up on my
Hmm.
visits,
Hmm.
and I would say that those were the biggest factors that have played into my success this year. Um, it wasn't really much of the mechanical issues. It was a lot of the mental, you know. And that's really what I was looking for going into my visits that I took is
Hmm.
uh I knew like my freshman sophomore year, I knew I was emotional. Um and I knew how angry I could get when things don't go my way. So,
Yeah.
um, and so that's kind of just something I took going into my visits was, um, what's some way I could dial things back, reset, and not just be so agitated at what's going around me. Like, how can I control the things that I can control?
Yeah.
So I would say just, some of the mental aspects of it was really the big takeaways. And of course, there's always, the analytical, there's so much analytical data now with all the TrackMan and Soda. So there was, I had the one thing that they told me was I needed to change up. So they gave me two options. It was either throw a splitter or the new kick change up. And I chose the kick change up, and it's been working well recently, and I still got to get a little more consistent with it. And so that the I would say like more of the mechanical things were just finding something to go this way.
Yeah.
So,
Do you
but
so now you've got your commitment in hand, you've got your next 4 years after high school planned out in a sense. You're going to Vanderbilt, great school. You're gonna study. Any idea what you're thinking about as far as your studies?
I'm thinking as of now something business wise. I know they have a really good business school over there. So
Yeah. Has it made it easier for you knowing that you've got your college plan set out? You're finishing up your junior year now, so you're gonna go into your senior year. Is it like senior year is just gonna be a whole lot less pressure for you? Like you can have more fun. At the same time, you also want to show Vanderbilt that they made the right choice. That you're not peaking too early, kind of thing. What are your thoughts going into that senior year? Thinking ahead right now.
I guess the way like that the way I walked into this junior year is kind of just like, what else do I have to prove type of thing. Like it getting the commitment out of the way relieves so much pressure off of me. And it's kind of just like who do I need to prove when I go out there on the mound? Like it's just like, even like when guys chirp from the other dugout or, parents in the stands, it's like, I just shake it off. Like there's the pressure relieved off of me has been, it's made things so much easier. And I've grown so much in my faith with God, and I kind of just leave the results up to God. That's one of my biggest things is I stopped worrying about the outcome. It's how can you change an outcome that has already been designated by God? And I've just stopped worrying about it when I get on the mound. I like I'll come back in the dugout and they're like, "Davis, are you talking to yourself?" I go, "No, man, I'm just singing." Like I get on the mound and I'm just I'm singing worship songs, or I'm just talking through counts in my head, and I'm just finding ways to calm myself, and but I go up there and I'm just like, there's nothing else to prove. Like I'm just gonna play my game, leave the results up to God, and whatever He has in store, He has in store. So
Yeah.
that's really been the biggest thing for me this year.
One of the other guests on the show this week has been Max Brown, who's a former five-star quarterback, and now he's a commentator for ESPN. He talked about something he was talking about on his social media recently, which is about the whole concept of the Mamba mentality, which is like going in and just being full bore, almost psychotically single-minded toward excelling in your craft of your sport. And that was sort of the mentality that ruled through youth sports for probably a whole generation. And now you're starting to see more athletes around your age who are kind of like yourself, more well-rounded overall. And it's like maybe there's more than one way to skin a cat in a sense, because like you don't need to be psycho, just eat, live and breathe baseball necessarily 24 hours.
Yeah.
That could work. That could also work. But maybe having that moment of zen that you're talking about, if you can keep yourself calm and focused by having a wider range of interests, maybe that works too. Like, where do you land on that on those two schools of thought? Which one do you think is like the most effective for you? And then what do you think more of your peers, how do they approach things?
I think for me, it's definitely that calmer side of it. But I think I also have a good amount of both, right? So it's, there's some times in a game you have to, you have to bear down, you have to get angry, that competitive side needs to come out. But it's for pitching, especially, it can't be all the time. That's just how you're going to find out, you're going to find a quicker way to get injured. And that's kind of how I think about it. And, if you want to go play football, be a middle linebacker and smack your helmet and get all crazy, like, go for it. Like, I feel like there's certain positions in different sports. Like, so pitching and being a quarterback are very similar. And I'm so glad that I ended up playing quarterback, because you can't always have those crazy moments. You have to calm down and you have to analyze things, and you have to be able to just not worry about things. So I think there's definitely,
unless you're a reliever, right? Those are always the crazy gonzo guys coming in. And
those guys could be crazy. Those guys are allowed to be crazy.
Well, Davis Wilson is one of the top high school baseball prospects for the class of 2027, the top right-hander pitcher in California, really one of the best athletes in the country for class of 27, overall athletes. Davis, thanks for coming on the Heisman Trophy podcast. It's really cool talking to someone who is going through it right now, because we're talking about the people who have been through it, and to talk to someone who is doing it right now. It's pretty cool to see what your daily life is like, and trying to become the best you can be in baseball. So thanks for coming on the show, and good luck in the future, and enjoy the rest of your season.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
Well, that'll do it for this month's episode. Thanks to all our guests. Appreciate them taking the time to come on. Lots of great discussions. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel, where you'll see video versions of these interviews. We'll see you next month.
The Heisman Trophy podcast is now year-round, every Wednesday during the college football season and monthly during the offseason. This show is produced, edited, engineered, and hosted by the Heisman pundit himself, Chris Houston. The audio portion of the podcast, as well as transcripts, is available on all streaming services, while full video interviews and clips can be found on our YouTube channel as well as on TikTok. Special thanks to the Heisman Foundation, its CEO Jeff Price and Vice President Tim Henning for their support. We'd love your support too, so be sure to like and subscribe. For comments, criticism, and feedback, you can reach us at pod@heisman.com.